Alright friends, we're going to read chapter 10 of My Teacher's an Alien. Starts on page 64. Chapter 10, Solo Effort. My mouth went dry. My hands started shaking. Peter's eyes were so wide they looked like ping pong balls. Shh, cautioned Miss Schwartz. Don't make a sound. I appreciated the advice, but I had already figured out that much on my own. What are we going to do? I thought. To my surprise, Miss Schwartz answered me. Wait till he reports in, she said. Then you can sneak out. Did you just read my mind, I thought? Just the message you sent me, she replied. That was a relief. There's a lot going on inside my head that I don't want anyone to know about. Not even Miss Schwartz. I looked around the attic. If Broxholm came up here, we were sunk. I couldn't see a single thing to hide behind. Suddenly, I heard that horrible music again. This is our chance, I whispered. He must be in his dressing room. I bet if he's taking off his face and getting ready to report into the ship. Then let's go, said Peter. Wait, I said desperately. What about Miss Schwartz? We can't just leave her here like this. You have to, she thought at us. I'm all right for the time being. The best thing you can do for me is unmask the alien. I still hesitated. Go! She shouted in my head. The message was so powerful, I staggered back from the force field. Casting a last look over my shoulder, I took Peter's hand. He didn't pull away. This wasn't romance, it was terror. Each of us needed someone to hold on to as we sneaked down the stairway. When we reached the bottom, Peter opened the door as quietly as he could. The tiny click was lost in that awful screech of alien music. Moving slowly, he peered around the edge. No one in sight, he whispered. Then let's go. My heart was pounding in my ears. I don't think I've ever been so frightened in my life. I had a feeling Broxholm would jump out and grab at any second. For one horrible instant, I wondered if the mirror on his dressing table might be at the right angle to show our reflections as we stepped out of the attic. I imagined him racing into the hallway, his Mr. Smith face hanging around his chin, ready to turn us into a pair of puddles on the floor, or whatever a person from his planet did to the kids he caught snooping in his attic. The screeching music continued. Still moving slowly, Peter closed the door behind us. That seemed like a waste of time, until I realized he was afraid that if he didn't secure it, the door might swing open after he let go of it. One noise like that, and we were dead meat. Dropping to our hands and knees, we crawled along the edge of the wall. I couldn't help it. When I was opposite the door of Broxholm's room, I glanced in. Broxholm was sitting there, peeling off his face, and I prayed that he wouldn't see me and crept forward. We slid down the stairs, slipped out the front door, and ran for all we were worth. After about 3 blocks, we stopped to catch our breath, but not for long. In addition to everything else, I was worried that since Broxholm was back, my parents might be home too. But when we reached my house, I could see that I'd been the first back. This wasn't too surprising. My folks often stayed to gab with the other parents after the formal meeting was over. It was even possible that the meeting was still going on, and Broxholm had just managed to slip out early. Peter walked me to my door. I thought it was brave of him, especially when I watched him walk into the darkness and realized how frightened I would be if I had to go home alone. That skinny kid had more courage than anyone I knew. As for me, I was terrified. I went around and turned on every light in the house. Don't ask me what good I thought this would do. All I know is that it made me feel better. Then I sat in the living room, waiting for my parents to get home and worrying that Broxholm might show up first. All in all, I decided it had been a good night's worth. Even if I hadn't found anything to prove my story, at least one other person now knew what was going on. Even more important, we had found Miss Schwartz. But what should we do now? The crucial thing was to reveal Broxholm for what he really was. But how could we do that without getting turned into puddles on the floor? Our only advantage was that he didn't know we knew his secret. If we could make whatever we did seem innocent, he might not guess what we were up to. Of course, the most obvious thing was to just pull off his mask. But how do you pull off an alien's face? I spent the whole night trying to find the courage to do what I knew I had to do the next day. Mr. Bamwick was scheduled me for extra lessons that morning. As usual, Smith/Broxholm shuddered when he saw me pick up my piccolo. Let him shudder. If he kidnapped me, maybe I'd play the piccolo all the way to the next galaxy. The reason for the extra lesson was that Bam Boom wanted me to work on the solo that he had asked me to play for the spring concert. We were doing the greatest march of all time, Stars and Stripes Forever by John Philip Sousa. If you don't know it, you should go to your library and get a record of it so you can listen to it. It's great. Anyway, the high point of the march is incredibly neat, incredibly difficult piccolo solo. Mr. Bamwick told me way back in February that he wanted our band to do this march for 7 years. He said he'd just been waiting until he had a piccolo player good enough to handle the solo, and now he thought he had one. Me. I was flattered that he had so much faith in me. The problem was, I didn't have that much faith in me. Oh, I could do most of the solo right, most of the time, but there was one trill near the end that I always messed up on. Let me tell you, if you're going to play something in a concert, you don't want to get almost right. You want it perfect. But Mr. Bamwick was determined that we would play Stars and Stripes Forever that spring or die trying. The way my lesson was going that Friday, it looked as if we were going to die. Come on, Susan, said Mr. Bamwick after I messed up the third time. The concert is next week. Did you practice last night? I shook my head. I didn't have time, I said. I knew it sounded pretty lame, but how could I tell him that I hadn't practiced because I'd been prowling through my teacher's house trying to find evidence to prove that he was an alien? I could see Mr. Bamwick trying to control himself. I have to give him credit. He knows that it doesn't do any good to make kids feel stupid. But I could tell he really wanted to explode. By the time I left his room, I was pretty upset with myself. That wasn't all bad. Being angry gave me the strength to do what I knew I had to. Taking a deep breath, I marched back into my room. I paused outside the door and took another deep breath. Then I went through the door, staggered over to Mr. Smith's desk, and pretended to faint. On the way down, I grabbed for his ear.